The first task that I want you to do is to answer the 3 questions on the right hand side of the code by looking at the actual code on the left hand side. Please pause the video and answer these questions now. You should have answered the questions now. Let's go through some of the answers. First of all, question 1. What would be the output for the code on the left? Well, first of all, let's talk through the code. We've got 3 functions here. Remember, a function returns a value. Our functions go at the top of the page, and we usually have a subprogram, a def main, which would come at the end of the different functions and procedures. So this doesn't have that. The code would pass through the functions and record the values of a equals 4, b equals 8 and c equals 1. It would then go down to the final line of code, the print line. You can see inside the brackets and print, it is going to print whatever happens from minimum. So minimum is our function, remember. We're going to pass the values a and c to minimum. So we're going to pass 4 and 1 to minimum. And then it's going to print the return value. Now notice how the function minimum has 2 return values, an a and a b. We couldn't print that value in the last line if we didn't have a return value. That's because otherwise it would be blank. So we can't print a procedure. Now, def minimum is expecting to receive 2 values, a and b. However, that's not 4 and 8. It would actually receive 4 and 1, because remember, we are sending it the values 4 and 1, a and c. When we get to def minimum, a and b are brand new variables, and this is why we need to make sure that our variables that we use inside functions and procedures are different to those that we use outside of them. These are local variables and have no resemblance to the a, b and c that we set earlier. However, they are set to the values that are sent to our procedure. It's expecting 2 and it's going to receive 4 and 1. So that means it's going to store those in a new value. So then we go to our if statement. If a is smaller than b, so is 4 smaller than 1? Well, no, it's not. So then it's going to run the else, which is return b. Remember, that's returning the value 1. So 1 will be returned as a result of this function, and that is the value that would be printed. So the output would be the number 1. Question 2, what is the difference between a procedure and a function? Well, a procedure is going to just carry out one function, and it's not going to return a value like a function. A function returns a value and should carry out one piece of code. So remember, if we're printing the result, well, there's not going to be a result of a procedure because there is no return value. Whereas with a function, we are going to print that value. Why would we use a function or procedure? Well, first of all, it means we don't have to repeat code. If we've got some repetitive code within our program, we don't have to keep programming that. We can just keep calling it. Secondly, it makes it really useful for when we're debugging code. We've got small little bits of code which have one purpose. So when we get into more advanced programs, we're not having to debug a massive amount of code. If there's a problem with the average, we know it's going to be in the top section of the code. It might be in the call of the function, it might be in the return value, but we know it's going to be associated to that. This also means that we can do some shared programming. It might be that you've set out a larger program, and the first programmer is going to make a function to create the average, the second one is going to do the minimum, and the third one is going to create a program which does the total. And we can keep recalling this code again. In reality, these functions might be quite a lot larger, so if you think of it like when we're sharing that code, we're sharing that workload. Task number 2. Spot the errors. Can you find any errors in the code? Pause the video and then go through the answers and try and figure out what the answers will be. Okay, you should have tried to answer what the errors were. I'm going to go through a couple of them, but you might have actually spotted some other errors. The first, hopefully obvious error to you is that print smallest. Well, there isn't a function and there isn't a procedure called smallest. This is the same piece of code that we've just looked at, and hopefully you would have noticed that that's going to give us a syntax error because it doesn't know what smallest is. The second one, look in our average. In the average one, we've got a value A, B, C. We are calculating a value D, but then we're just returning the value A. So this is going to give us a logical error. We're returning the wrong value. So this is not going to work. The next error, look at the minimum. This, remember, the minimum one is a procedure because there's no return value. We received two values, A and B, and the if statement says if A is less than B, but then print out A is the largest and otherwise B is the largest. We've got a problem there. That's a logical error. The code should still run, but we know we should have smallest in that bracket there. And finally, def total. It's going to receive some values A, B and C. However, it's then printing D equals, well, it's not printing, it's saying D equals A plus B plus C. But unfortunately, there is no return and there's no print. So there's no need for this procedure. We can think of functions as having an input and an output. The function is the program, small part of code, which actually turns the input into an output. But in terms of a function, we're going to return a value. So we can represent it like fx. The function has done something to the value of x and returned a value. You now have 3 tasks to complete in Trinket. Each of the tasks, I'm expecting you to add comments and to add input validation where that is needed. Please make sure you have a series of subprograms. The purpose of this is we're learning about subprograms and you should have a main subprogram. You're also going to need to be using functions. I don't want any procedures used in this task. We should be writing functions and the task asks you for functions. So you're going to be having to pass data to the function and then print that data out. We don't want to be collecting that data inside these functions. Please answer these in Trinket. Now, before you tackle one of the problems, I want you to make sure that you decompose the problems. What are you going to have to do and where is that code going to happen? Don't just jump into it without thinking about the structure of the code and then break that down into logical steps. So we need to think about these maths problems logically. You need to be doing step-by-step instructions, making sure that the user is aware of what they have to put in and what data they should be inputting, and then you need to be making sure you pass parameters to your functions. So program it one line at a time. Remember, program a line, check it. Don't write a massive program and expect it all to work. You should be doing it step by step. You might want to think about the maths first and abstract the details. Try working through the problems first before you actually program them.